Okay, so let's just remember that we are safe right now in this room, and we can breathe. And these examples are real examples, they're true, we didn't make them up, but they're not happening right now to us. Okay? Okay? And they're a tool for learning. Okay? Let's just, some general impressions when you were reading them. General, start there.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was obvious that people were talking about things. They oftentimes were very vague. And they would talk about things that they obviously knew nothing about. And they were angered by things which they had no understanding or most likely no study of.
So let's reframe this a little bit. Because none of us know nothing,
Okay, sorry.
right? No, I actually saw an opportunity. This is often our reaction is, oh, this person is completely ignorant. Well, this person knows a whole lot about something else, right? And that something else is coming through. We definitely do not share that iceberg, right? That they don't lack an iceberg. Okay. Other,
Going off of your comment, a lot of these being social media comments, my first reaction is, don't feed the trolls. It's like, don't engage. There's no point in commenting like to YouTube comments, just ignore it.
I actually want to take this opportunity because when this is happening at PCC during this time, right? And many of our administrators are the ones who got these messages, right? Who do you think get these messages all year round? For example, the Multicultural Center, right? So the thing is that we want to say, oh, just this is a circumstantial, one-time experience. What has happened is that it's spilling over into the realm of individuals and communities who are not used to this. So it would be easy to then say, oh, you know, only if you feed the trolls, this gets worse. But that's not the experience for everybody.
Yeah. It's a first reaction, it's not necessarily the right reaction.
It is, and of course, because we want the pain to end. This is painful. This is painful. There's no, you know, doesn't matter what we think or our opinions, these are painful exchanges. Many of them are clearly in pain, right? And we don't want to participate in pain as a human reaction. So we want it to end, so we went, okay, push it away. Great, thank you.
Well, because the obvious, well, when people go online or when these examples come up and these people think that their opinion needs to be heard and it needs to be out there and what they say is important, that's an example of the white privilege that's shining through in their statements. And whereas other cultures and marginalized groups don't have that luxury to just say whatever, whenever, however, you know. But obviously, they think that, you know, they're working at it and are important.
Yeah. And so there is the experience of entitlement.
Entitlement.
Right?
Yeah.
And regardless of the color of our skin, we have access to entitlement at different identities, and whiteness is one of them, right? And some might argue, anybody can say anything, right, in the United States. So we can, maybe the consequences are different, right? Okay. So there's a lot of underlying messages of, you're making me feel uncomfortable, therefore, this shouldn't happen. Right? There's some of that.
Yeah, as far as like the feeling underneath here of how threatening all this is. There's this use of, you know, I'm the center of the culture, or I, you know, to feel this center shifting, the attention shifting, and it's very threatening. and, because I just can't imagine being so emotionally involved and, because I know some people over here are gonna have a conversation I disagree with, and then feel like I need to, set them straight somehow. Like, that's just sort of fascinating to me that is that personal to them.
Yes, and I think that part of when we react strongly about something, I think it's a source of meaning. And it'd be great if we could say, clearly this is important. So let's talk about it, right? But that's not exactly the consequence, right? Right, so there's some very strong feelings, and sometimes the strong feelings are followed by, so stop it.
Right.
Don't do it. Okay?
Yeah, Ruth, but in some of the things that we were looking at is trying to put a lot of the truth and things that are hurtful, things that have been done and have been committed just under the rug and trying not to see it. And you can see it in a lot of, well, in a couple of them, especially about historical truth as well, and how much we want to put it under the rug and try to not deal with it. And that has consequences as well. And I think that a lot of this is actually showing how putting everything under the rug historically and not trying to deal with it because it's too painful and we don't want to see ourselves in the bad light. So we just put it under the rug and we didn't commit all this stuff. It's like, well, somebody else did long ago and we're not seeing it, is coming up to light.
The thing, yes, very true. And I will add to that, that we not only tried, we as in the bigger systems and institutions, tried to put things under the rug, but certain people live under the rug. Right? Because, I mean, I have often heard, oh, it's painful, but at least we're talking about it. And I agree. We finally need to talk about it. But it's not like I haven't been talking about it for the past 20 years. I've been living under the rug where all of these things are being put and covered. And when we're working together, I thought, uncovering the cupboard. I was like, it's not covered for me. I don't live where that is covered. And many of our communities, our co-workers, our students live under the rug where we continue to put the historical facts, historical discourse. And it creates pain. I mean, I think that we need to sit with it too. That when we live in this moment in history, the post-colonial, and to talk about these things is painful, and to deny that it is unfair, and not strategic. Because when I say, well, we need to talk about it, so buckle up, I'm not acknowledging what are some of the resistance that I might encounter by doing this. So I'm not going to be strategic, which is part of why we're doing this on April 1st, right? It is strategic to assume that we are causing pain. To talk, before I was the Multicultural Center coordinator, I was coordinating a rape prevention education program. And people were afraid of me talking about sexual violence in the classroom because it's painful. And I'm like, yes, what's the alternative?
And isn't it sort of a function of whiteness that whiteness avoids all talk of conflict and pain?
Yes.
So I mean, that's part of the reason.
It is, but for some. Because it's always at the expense of those who are negatively impacted by the silence. So it's not avoidance of conflict. It's displacement of conflict. It lives somewhere else.
I'm sorry. This just made me think of that behind the argument of, can't you call it something else?
Yeah, please, right?
Yeah.
I might engage with you if you call it something else. And colorism, I've heard. Let's just call it colorism. Sorry.
Because that's more benign.
But because it might sound more benign because I want to approach it, but I don't want to experience too much pain. right? And it's to be understood again, of course. Who wants pain for free? Raise your hand. We don't. We engage in these painful experiences and processes because we're investing for the kind of environment and campus climate and community that we are dreaming of. But it's not without pain for any of us. But the difference is with status quo, with not doing something, some will experience significantly less pain than others. Okay. So these were the themes. Any other general comments about the examples? Let's name some biases that you were able to identify. I wrote here, not all have biases, but so who deserves to be heard is part of some of the biases. Who is deserving of, remember, second-class citizen? So you have less right to participation in dialogue. The things that matter to you, that impact your life, are not important. Just get with the program. So deserving is a huge theme on many of the themes, or the examples rather. So deserving is one of the themes. What others? Or second-class citizen.
Well, almost all of ours talked about that we were breaking the law, treasonous or criminal, or this action is an investigation of whiteness is somehow.
Remember the slide about legal, illegal? That responds to a very specific iceberg, right? Any talk about race, and then the understanding that as soon as you talk about race, you're participating in racism, which is not fact, right? Is part of that iceberg. So we are illegal because we're not fitting with the standard as defined by the particular iceberg of whiteness. Okay, so, okay, what else?
Where does ignorance fit?
Right, so I don't call ignorance a bias. That's why I'm like, not all of them are biased. Right?
Ignorance is not a bias.
No.
Well, it's a privilege then.
It
You
is.
get to be.
Yes, not knowing about the realities and consequences of a system that operates under whiteness and white supremacy, it is not a bias. It's a product of privilege. Is that the system colludes so that you don't have to know. You don't have to live under the rug. So only those who live under the rug don't get to be ignorant. Now, it doesn't mean that we know the truth either,
Right.
right? It means that we know something else. So ignorance is not a bias. That's why I'm like, no, a lot of these is about not knowing. Okay.
Ignorance creates biases.
Yes. Well, and knowledge also creates biases. Yeah. Right? Okay, what else? What else did we observe in them?
The myth of meritocracy.
Yes.
So a couple of ours, or actually several of ours, basically said that the opportunities are there, that people are not taking advantage of them. So they didn't say that nicely, but that was the message.
And it's a circular kind of thinking, right? So the norm, the right way, the natural way is you work hard, you get X. But then if you don't have X, it's because you haven't worked hard. Right? And it doesn't accept any other variable, including the moment in history and the context where this is happening, or being said that is happening. Right? So I call merit, did I spell that right?
Yeah.
With deserving.
So then in this case, it's individualism too. Meritocracy and individualism are the same.
Yes. Meritocracy, and where should let's put that in here. I will say related to, it's not exactly the same, but it's very much the discourse of meritocracy. It is fed, it is nurtured by the discourse of individualism.
We've heard a lot of denial in ours.
Denial, right.
Individuals.
So there's also, that's also a product of privilege, right? And it's a reaction I have of entitlement. And also, when I deny it exists, what I'm doing is basically making my personal experience a plural and applying it as a fact. I haven't experienced it. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist for anybody.
Or haven't committed it, so it doesn't exist.
Yes. I've never been a racist, as far as I know. Right? Therefore, it hasn't happened. So we create plurals, I guess, out of our singular experiences and apply it to everybody.
Well, and that also stops the conversation.
Almost certainly. Yeah, it's a very effective conversation stopper. Here and then here.
I wonder what you would say about language and bias when you have sexist, heterosexist. We had a lot of sort of foul language that
Yes.
that's packed with
Thank you.
sexist and lots of other biases. But I'm wondering, that certainly creates a force in the utterance. But I'm wondering how you would then connect that to bias.
Yes, like I said, when we're talking about these themes, that they're often interwoven, right? So some of the messages said you are a bunch of racists and pussies. Pussy, I cannot even say that. But you know what I'm saying, right? Right. So that, is a sexist expression. So it's packed with bias and informed by this dichotomizing, dualistic, antagonizing ways we value difference. So you're not the standard, therefore you're all of this bad fits. Right? And I want to take away legitimacy from the work you're doing. So I am going to call you everything that in this moment in history takes away legitimacy from you, which includes being a person of color, a woman, a person with disability, So I'm calling you all of that, taking power away from you. So all of that is packed with biases. I said, sorry, here, then there was a hand here, then Laura.
I noticed it not just from here, but like on social media and stuff, I feel like people feel the privilege to be able to just come out and straight up lie about things, to villainize other people. I mean, just straight up lies us back.
Yeah.
Like this one says, 0 black women were raped or sexually assaulted by white men. So it's like, that's physically impossible for 2004. And then it goes and says that 2004, 11,611 white women were raped and sexually assaulted by black men. Now, first of all, it's who's raping, it's also about who's getting raped, because the victims, it doesn't matter what color you are, and then this is a blatant lie. Everything about this is a lie. I just look at it and it just makes me feel
And it informs an iceberg, right?
yeah.
And it tells us who is important, who deserves to be protected, and from whom. So in that message, there's nothing about, women, black women, for example, being raped. What is important in that message is white women are being raped by no other than black.
No, however, Mexicans, according to Trump.
So according, right? Let's unpack this one at a time. Right?
Yeah.
So that hidden in those messages are a lot of value statements. Who matters? And then not only who matters, who deserves to be protected is villainized. Because not only blacks are being villainized, but also is how dare they rape white women. That is even worse, right? So there is the sexist bias
Yeah.
clearly there, and of course, the race bias clearly there.
Yeah.
All right.
And there's a continuity too, that's just, I love that one. I haven't seen it, I really like it, I want it. It just shows 1700s continuity in thought.
Yes, it informs a lot of the moment in history where we live in. And part of what I want to really emphasize is that, you know, we might have very strong reactions. This is the normal,
I know.
right? And we need to, like, of course you think this way. This makes sense that it's happening in this moment in history.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It doesn't mean that it's right or true, but it makes sense.
I mean, isn't it, I mean,
No.
to cite to pretend like you're citing the Department of Justice, I mean, it just seems like, come on.
It's called yellow journaling.
It's just,
That's why you hire a top.
You can create anything, right?
you can say anything. And the thing is, as an activist, I will protect freedom of speech.
But
And
shouldn't people have to find evidence before they speak?
That would be ethical. That would be ethical. But that doesn't mean it's illegal, right? But you know, when you read it, you can, well, where's the citation? Where is, no. So as a consumer of information, we're responsible to do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I know that there was Kelly, then Laura.
We had definitely interwoven themes for sure. I'm not sure which one was the best. Color, and I use the term very loosely.
So, yeah, there's no Oppression Olympics. So.
So I think colorblindness was probably one of our biggest things, and I just want to say this was that I always say I'm a racist, 2 exclamations. I am for one race, the human race, as are 99% of my fellow, in quotes, whites.
I know. I think that we could have even more time to go like one by one and examine the continuum of thinking and also contextualizing it to this moment in history and how it just fits. It fits. So these messages, Laura and then Sam.
So, one of our messages said, 100% white, born in the United States, and I'm not ashamed of anything except Portland Community College and its faculty, and they have the apostrophe in the the shame is on you, okay? But the 100% white, born in the United States, just that double privilege, and probably this guy's a male, that's what I think, that's my bias.
Yeah, that's the card. Yes, it comes through that these messages belong to a very specific iceberg with very strict and rigid ways of defining what's positive, good, normal, and a denial of, you know, the people from the U.S., from this land, are not white.
Right.
The native language of the U.S. was not English. Right? That is, but then institutions like ours, like PCC, contribute to the inaccurate education of students that continue experiencing life as if those were the historical facts. Sam?
Just one thing I noticed in our examples was the spectrum of bias, and that there was some vitriol, like you racist bigoted pigs.
Right.
And there were some other examples that were much harder to identify in that bias, that broad spectrum of resistance.
Right, yeah. From please don't bring up race. As soon as you talk about race, then you're engaging in racism. And I clearly am not for racism, so you bad people, shame on you. See how that builds. Yeah, and there's I would think, also a lot of ignorance there. So there's bias and ignorance and pseudo-knowledge. Right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So let's then look at the tool that you have. We'll just use these 3 examples. I'm going to share with you at least my thesis who are speaking up, I want to go over some considerations, but in very quickly. Mostly, I want to set the stage for what I call the nirvana interruption. I've done many interruptions in my life, many, some just absolutely excellent, and some not so much, but I've interrupted, right? I've been called honey, and I said, don't call me honey. That was, you know, my very eloquent interruption. Right? I was angry, but I interrupted. I am sure that this person was not suddenly impacted by my words and say, I don't want to be sexist ever again in my life. What do I do, Rut? Right? But it was an interruption. So I want to, from the get-go, interruptions are, the drive for the interruption cannot be that I'm going to get this person to think in a particular way. First of all, that's imposing a point of view. First of all, right? Second of all, I am setting myself for failure. It's a realistic expectation. The drive of an interruption is to create a pause for pondering. Just pause. Interrupt this flow of thinking, this assumption that everybody around me agrees with this system of belief. So it's even saying, ouch, God, okay, I need a break. That's an interruption. Now you don't even know what I'm ouching about, figure it out. That's an interruption. Not the most, you know, the one that ripple effects, maybe not, but it's an interruption. So, most effective interruptions when used in combination with another. So we talk about, you know, when I hear, notice my I statement, when I hear that word, it makes me feel blah, blah, blah. It reminds me of blah, blah, blah. It makes me concerned about blah, blah, blah. And then I would prefer, that's a combination. So that's all we need in that, you know, to do for an interruption to be an interruption. We don't need to go, why do you think that? First of all, we know why. It's not like we don't know. It's embedded in our moment in history, in our institutions, in our social relationships. I call it, it's embedded in our genes at this point. We were talking about it earlier. Sometimes, well, not sometimes actually, these experiences of bias, particularly the ones about and around whiteness, are not about one person, one individual. Let's not make it about them. Because we then are the ones missing the point. So let's not personalize it. Let's talk about the context. So separate the person from the action or behavior instead of saying, you're racist. Like, well, who's not? So try saying that could be perceived as racist remark. Actually, my preference, that's actually from a particular source. My preference is to say, it makes me feel, like I feel offended. I perceive that remark as racist. Because then that person can say, if you say, that could be perceived. By who? Nobody does. Let's ask. Nobody said anything. If it's offensive to you, then it's offensive to you.
When I've used that approach, it could be perceived, the person still thought I was saying it, so it didn't really matter.
I'm sorry?
When I've used that approach, it could be perceived as that, something like that, it didn't matter.
It didn't matter.
They still heard it that I was saying that they were racist.
Yeah, right. So they felt it's personalizing.
Yeah, so I might as well make it personal.
To me. It said personalize it to me, to you.
Yeah.
Like, this is important to me. Sometimes you say it might be offensive to Ricky.
Right.
Well, first of all, maybe Ricky is like what? I'm cool. Doesn't matter. I found it offensive. And that person cannot deny that because I just said it. I'm offended. Okay. Okay. And of course, calling people racist not only is not going to be effective in an interruption, it's also inaccurate. As if there are some people who are and some people who don't. We are engaging in this moment in history. We are absorbing the values and systems of belief, the norms of whiteness. So to suggest that some people have absorbed that and some people haven't is misguiding.
I disagree.
Tell.
No, that's okay. Our show.
In my show. It's our show. Avoid starting questions with why. Why questions, you're making that person feel that they have to justify themselves. Now, you don't have to always protect someone. I'm talking about that nirvana interruption, right? When for some reason, I want to invest a lot of energy into this relationship. So why questions tend to make people feel like, oh, now I have to justify myself to you, right? So it might not set the conversation that we want. And again, we don't always need to have conversations. I told to my students, I constantly say, you don't have to have every conversation. We need to do something every time, but that something could be very different. Okay. When addressing a microaggression or a bias or a stereotype, blank, try to avoid using the pronoun you. Again, like why it makes them feel like you're personalizing it. Let's talk about the context, the bigger picture. It's more informative and usually that leads to a conversation. Using I statements is a powerful way of doing that. So, of course, tone of voice. Again, this is the nirvana one. As a woman of color who was being called honey by a white man who was being offensive to me, quite on purpose, I really did not want to concern myself for his feelings. Evidently, my feelings were not his concerns either. I was, in that moment, I was me, like, no, I'm not going to tolerate this treatment, right? So, my tone of voice was not the one that will conduct, oh, let's sit down and talk about this. Let's have a cup of coffee. And I did not want to have a cup of coffee with this guy. Right? Okay. Sometimes humor can diffuse a tense situation, but not all of us master humor. Okay, so let's be careful not to use it to minimize what's been said or done, or nor to give the impression of collusion. And sometimes that's exactly what we do when we use humor. What you're doing is not that terrible, basically, even though we feel the contrary. So the Speak Up handout you have, this is from the Speak Up program, Teaching Tolerance. We can talk about that later. I know. Anyway, but this is a great tool that they've created. And it's basically 4 strategies to interrupt bias. The first one is to interrupt. Speak up against every bias remark, every time. Now, it doesn't have to be that you speak up in terms of you say something to that person. It might be that the strategy will be, I did not know what to say. I was like, ouch, maybe that's all I did. Ouch, that hurts. See you later. But then I speak with my folks at Aware or at Sea, or my colleague that I trust, or my friend that I trust. And I want to do this differently next time. I want to explore it. I want to discover. Right? So that's still doing something. Okay? Prepare. Do your homework. I think that practicing what you would say helps a lot. Ask questions. And now, sometimes I hear questions that are not honest. Like, why do you think that? If I know, why would I ask? Why are you objectifying women? Well, let's talk about post-colonial world. Let's talk about imperialistic attitudes, right? So let's ask honest questions to remarks. Let's find out, what are things that we can talk with this particular speaker. If I'm, again, invested in this particular exchange, so I can best address